Welcome to TIA Talks. My name is Jason, and I'm the host of this amazing podcast where we start the conversation that hopefully will bring change in this industry we so love. With me today, I've got Mitesh Lakha and Simon Colman, the man that kicked me out of the Insurance Apprentice. Before I get to why you kicked me out, Simon, welcome. Welcome. Mitesh,
Thanks,
welcome. Mitesh, I think I'm going to start with you. Maybe give us a little bit of background about just your role in the industry and what you do.
Sure, yeah. So I've been in the insurance industry for just over 10 years now, across various roles in sort of UMAs and specialist classes, in the intermediated distribution space, as well as today my current role where I look after an insurance brokerage. Well, sort of Tracker Financial Services is three things. It rents a cell captive license from a cell captive provider. It's a binder holder into the cell, and it's also the broker that sells and services the product. So I guess with sort of that exposure of being a key individual of the business and running it, you sort of get to touch all aspects of it, from sort of leads to sales, manage sort of churn, premium collections, and sort of obviously the overall governance and compliance aspect of it.
Sure. That's obviously we have a great IQ sitting in front of me. Simon, I don't know how about your IQ, but I know
pretty low.
Yeah, I know you've got a great EQ because you select people that have certain characteristics and strengths and weaknesses in the show in TIA. But in your everyday life, not only are you Simon Colman, the guy that lives in Cape Town and probably does nothing in that slow province.
Go for walks.
Yeah. I've seen that dog, cute dog. Check him out on social media.
His name is Archie.
Archie, what is he?
French Bulldog.
French Bulldog. Okay, they are very cute and super expensive. So Cape Town must be amazing.
Terrible watchdogs.
Yeah. I can
Noises
imagine.
Coming out of both ends, it's that kind of dog.
Well, okay, Simon, what do you do for like a living then in Cape Town while you sit in your room and suss out us previous contestants and
Yeah, it's interesting, Jason, because the Insurance Apprentice, I'd have to say, is I've got my longest tenure in my career on the show. I've changed jobs more frequently.
But you guys are serial, and by you guys I mean you and your wife, Christelle. You both are serial entrepreneurs.
She definitely is. This is still pretty new to me. So, I took over this business in July of last year.
The liability company.
Although at the time it was called Liability Matters. It was actually started by an old friend of mine who unfortunately passed away during the pandemic, Ken van Sweden. And Ken and I, we were in the same specialist sector. So I've been a liability underwriter since, I think, 1993, actually.
Sure.
Yeah, so it's a long time.
At least I was thought about.
Yeah, I don't really know how to do anything else. My whole career has been about liability-based business. First as a reinsurer. So I spent, you could actually divide my career into thirds. So it was like a third reinsurance. And then in the UMA space briefly, then working for an insurer, which was Santam for many years, 8 years actually.
That's where I idolized you.
So when you was at Santam.
Yeah, so when you're at SHA, I saw you on like some stage or something doing a roadshow.
Oh, right.
And I was like, sure, this guy's not bad.
I loved my time.
I should have judged you better.
At Santam and SHA. It was really definitely a high point in my career. And that's where the entrepreneurial thing started coming in, because I've always been involved in developing products or technology, but within the safe confines of corporate. So kind of like being a faux entrepreneur, like not really exposing myself to risk, because you've got this big parent looking after you. And then, building up to July last year, after Santam put me on gardening leave for 9 months.
That's a restraint of trade for anyone that doesn't know.
Yeah. It's very useful, I must say, if you're setting up a business. Quite an inconvenience if you're changing jobs. But yeah, so I started at Liability Matters. We rebranded the business in October of last year, and it's called the Liability Company. And I think that really speaks to what we do. We kept Ken's original name of the business as our tagline. So we do what we do because liability matters.
Who thought about that? Are you that creative?
Yeah, I like that sort of thing. I've been involved in rebranding at Camargue, at SHA.
I remember the rebrand.
Yeah, it was really amazing to be able to do it for myself.
I think that's actually where I saw you, was at the launch of the rebrand.
Oh, right.
Yeah, I think that's actually...
Sure. Yeah, no, it was such a learning experience. To take what was already a very well-established brand and, freshen it up and try and appeal to a different audience. I learned a lot through that. And I was able to deploy that in my own space. So, what do I do for a living? I run this business. We're growing nicely. We've as of today, there's 7 people in the business, and we'll be 9 people in January. And when I took over, there were just two people in the business just over a year ago. So I think the right things are happening. And but the Apprentice is kind of what I've been passionate about, and I've been involved with the show since it started 10 years ago.
Yeah, 10 years. Mitesh, when did you enter and when did you compete in TIA?
Sure, so it was the Insurance Apprentice 2019.
2019, just before the pandemic, eh?
Yeah, maybe a season or two before,
Yeah, so it was at least in person.
If you want to look at that as a positive.
It wasn't the year that where we had to announce the winner virtually.
No.
That was the year after.
Sure. Yeah, I think we were completely in person.
Okay.
Yeah.
But you didn't, so I was going to say, you didn't win, but you came second, runner-up.
Sure.
That's a huge achievement. I mean, especially back then. I know that it was a different type of competition. What's your experience with TIA? What happened? What have you learned even from TIA?
Sure. So I think back then, and maybe it's sort of as sponsors sort of evolved and sort of times have changed, I think that season particularly was sort of more technically sort of based and more technical. And the sort of fellow contestants were really strong in sort of insurance knowledge. So I think the challenge then perhaps was sort of limited exposure. I guess you're sort of quite young and embryonic in your career, trying to sort of piece it together.
Where were you at that point in your career?
I was at Discovery Insure.
Okay.
So then only having exposure, to UMAs and specialist classes, as well as to personal lines insurance. So I think the big gap then, and sort of enlighteningly so, was sort of the commercial space, specialist classes of business, Sasria and sort of those spaces.
Yeah, and the winner was a commercial broker at the time. Eh?
Colin Lunsky.
Yeah, so shout out to the brokers as per the usual on this show. But that's an amazing achievement. What was your biggest learning from it? Because I know when we've chatted before over coffee or whatever, I've heard just good things come from it, and you've got such a mind. I've heard you speak, and when we have a few conversations, you actually lose me half the time because you just have an incredible mind. And I'm just interested to hear what your kind of experience was on the show, and then what you brought into your career, because you've really grown in your career. The trajectory from where you started to now. What has it been for you?
Yeah, thanks, Jason. There's definitely a few things, probably too many to sort of mention, but maybe sort of the key ones. Number one, sort of maybe not a learning or key takeaway, but sort of an observation, was sort of the passion. So even back then, from sort of the application part of the competition through to the various elimination rounds and taking part in it, sort of difficult to sort of assess, is this sort of superficial? Are people sort of faking it? Are they pretending to be someone else? And I'm sort of really happy to report, as of a couple of weeks ago, sort of attending one of the Joburg events, that the passion is definitely authentic and true. And there's sort of this influx of passionate individuals that really want to make a change. So why I mentioned that, and it sort of sounds interesting, I think it's because you can't teach attitude and you can't teach passion. So technical skills, sort of by and large, can always be taught, but attitude and passion and ambition can't. And without sort of going into the detail of it, I think sort of as people evolve into early adulthood, kind of the way that you're shaped and framed at that point is unlikely to sort of change. In terms of sort of problem solving, I'd have to say what I've learned to do is to listen, right?
I learned that too. Simon put me in my place about that.
And
That's really all we need you to know.
Yeah, just listen.
Just listen.
Yeah.
Sure, and I think so. It's different, right, with the lights and cameras and makeup and action, and you want to sort of make a name for yourself. You want to sort of prove yourself. But the biggest mistakes and blunders, as you sort of review 10 years worth of footage, is wanting to get into something too quickly. So sort of the learning that I take away from that is that you first need to understand what the problem is and really understand. So, and bringing it back to work, right? It's sort of what is your client asking you for, your supplier, your partner, any stakeholder in your business. If you can't sort of understand what they're asking and you're not listening to understand, and it's sort of that active listening, sort of difficult to respond and sort of give the client what they want. I think that's sort of been really valuable. I think more or similarly to that sort of leadership, right? So in the Insurance Apprentice, you sometimes sort of forced into a leadership role. And at times in your career, you also have to take up a leadership role, either whether it's for a project or it's sort of just your job, whatever it might be. And there's kind of a few things. And now these are lessons that I've learned in hindsight, right? Like hindsight's the best teacher. And I get to sort of give it for free to the subscribers and viewers of this podcast and aspiring Insurance Apprentice contestants.
But not only apprentice contestants, but also young individuals that are, or any individual actually that's trying to build their career or build a profession, in this industry. I mean,
100%, Jason. Yeah. So I think sort of the key takeaways there, sort of one, you need intelligent leadership, and what I mean by that, it's a leader's job to take something that's complex and complicated and sort of simplify it, right? And if sort of the team's unable to do so, to be able to articulate what the problem is that needs to be solved. What I've learned from the Insurance Apprentice too is that the leader speaks last. And why I mentioned that is sort of subsequently, or sort of after the Insurance Apprentice, I've been part of various sort of board meetings where there's a chairperson, or exco meetings where there's a CEO, and sort of how they put an idea across. To sort of give a hypothetical example, there's sort of, guys, I think that we should create an insurance solution for flying cars, but I don't think it's the right thing for us to focus on right now. So what you've done then is you sort of tainted and polluted that whole conversation, because not everyone's brave, right? So a lot of people don't want to have a contrarian view to the leader of the board or of the organization.
You've already been told it's a terrible idea before you even start.
Exactly. And there's not many but there's not many brave individuals that would then want to seem opposing or sort of contrary to the view.
And if it happens over and over again, it'll also just quash any bravery or courage that they had.
Yeah, 100%.
In the first place,
No, definitely. And I think sort of like finally on that point, I think then it's sort of, how do you sort of decentralize the decision-making of the task to the people in the team? So that's perhaps a complicated way to say, sort of how do you instill accountability and ownership for different components of a task and or project to people so that there's clarity and accountability around it. And I think that sort of stemming from sort of leadership, problem solving, listening, comprehension skills are some of the sort of valuable lessons that I've taken. And maybe sort of finally resilience. And it sounds like an interesting one, right? But your candle burns a bit brighter on task 1 of film week than on task 5.
Yeah.
So there's only so many knocks you can take to the jaw and still sort of show up. But that's sort of real life, right? So there's new and
Even
unique.
the judges are tired and irritated by the last task.
You don't even want to give us help.
No. Does someone really have to win this?
Yeah.
Sure, and you sort of it takes a lot of you to get out of that bed at the conference center and jump in the sort of transport and sort of show up. But that's sort of real life. You sort of, there's problems and challenges and opportunities, if you want to put a positive spin on it, every day. And I think the art to it, and to sort of frame the resilience in it, it's that how do you bank the successes and learnings of yesterday, where yesterday could be yesterday or the last quarter or the last financial year, and leave that in the past and show up today. Maybe sort of a different anecdote sort of on it. It's that if you took 10 calls in the day today, you'd want the 10th person that you spoke to get the same energy and passion out of you than the first person, right? And I'm sure more so as a broker. Imagine how your customer would feel if they called you at 4 PM and you were lethargic and you're like, oh, man, I've been on phone calls the whole day. And like, the person doesn't feel like you want to help them, right?
Yeah,
So I think-
resilience is a large part of it, I think. Rain also said it. You know, but I mean, you've touched on resilience, and many of the contestants that have pulled into or that have gone through the process of TIA have come out more resilient, but have also mentioned this resilience that they've just learnt about themselves. You know, I was knocked down a couple of times, and it was interesting because post TIA, it gave me such a boost to do what I knew I should be doing. You know, and it just kind of changed the way that I was operating in my business. It changed the way that I was operating in my marriage. It was just like there's so many learnings that I can take from a personal thing, but I also think that every contestant needs to be aware of the change and the learnings throughout the process. You know, speaking of marriage, no, I'm just kidding, Simon. I'm not going to bring up your 3 marriages.
Well, they weren't all at the same time, though. I just want to clarify that.
Okay, yeah. So, but you mentioned what BC before Christelle.
Before Christelle, yeah, there were 2 other Mrs. Colemans.
Yeah.
Other than my mom, of course.
No, but the reason I ask, I don't want you to get into your marriage. Don't worry, Simon, and your previous marriages and all sorts of things. I'm sure the listeners would love to hear the ladies' man Simon and what he's been up to.
No, so I mean, interestingly, my first wife works in the industry.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Do you want to have a shout out? So
Hey, Sheila. and I mean, I guess my kids have been exposed to, you know, their mom, their stepmom, their dad, all being in the industry. And so 2 of our 4 kids are also in the industry now.
Sure. You fall into insurance, apparently.
Sometimes
it runs
you
in
get pushed
your family.
by your parents.
Yeah, it runs in the family, definitely.
Yeah.
Sure. Well, from that though, BC days and potentially just before TIA or wherever you were back then, your growth through the industry has been up and down because of some personal struggles, which I think many people can relate to your story. And I would love for us to maybe dive into that a little bit.
Yeah.
For those of the listeners that don't know, you were an addict, and you I don't even know how to say it.
Yeah,
Simon,
I mean,
you tell me.
I mean, what I've learned is that I'll still call myself a recovering addict, because, you know, it's the disease of addiction, and I do buy into the concept that it's a disease, is one of those things that is kind of always waiting. You know, it'll always be a part of my makeup. So to use the term I was an addict or that I've recovered almost feels like it's inviting a disaster.
Oh, goodness.
So like my work here is done, I'm fixed, and I'm sorted, and it's not like that. You know, it's an ongoing kind of program that I have to work. But I mean, basically, I started drinking and doing drugs at the age of about 14, and I discovered I was really good at it. You know, I was very committed and dedicated. And I mean, I had this, I guess I was lucky in a way because I was quite academically inclined when I was at school. So it meant that, you know, as long as I kept my marks up and kept getting academic colors, for instance, I could keep using and doing what I needed to do. So really,
as long as you were functional.
Yeah, I started, that was when I really sort of had the split, you know, I had like a double life that was forming. So I had the sort of the face that everyone sees at school, my teachers, and then on the weekends, sometimes during the week, just getting absolutely out of my mind. And then when I went to university, I was studying a BCom law at Wits. I suddenly realized that I didn't have the intellect to just keep winging it like I'd been doing at school. There was actual work that needed to be done. You had to attend classes. And I remember I got offered a job at the Bozzoli Sports Pavilion, which is, at the time, there was a bar
The pause.
Is it still there?
The pause, yeah.
So
That was before my time,
so
obviously.
the owner kind of, or the manager came up to me and he was like, "Hey man, you're like always here. Do you want a job?" So I was like, "No man, I'm a student here." He's like, "Well, maybe you should think about going to class sometime." And when you get that kind of feedback from a bartender,
Yeah.
you should probably listen to it. But I got basically thrown out of Wits, and I spent probably 6 or 7 months of the following year trying to figure out what I was going to do. And I responded to an ad in a newspaper and got this job in insurance. And I'd been kind of, experimenting with, along with alcohol, but with LSD and, whatever I could get my hands on. But it was only when I started working that I met a like-minded individual who kind of introduced me to cocaine.
Oh, wow.
And that was probably in around about 1992, 93. And over the next 7 years, this thing just kind of consumed me. So I carried on with this double life, and I got married in between, had some kids. And I remember, it's kind of a funny story, but I guess pretty tragic, really. But my first wife, Sheila, when she found out that I'd been doing coke, she confronted me about it, and she said, how long has this been going on? And I guess she expected me to kind of go, oh, it's like the first or second time that I tried it. And I was like, oh no, like a few years, and she was like, you better get some help. And so the next day I looked back then we had phone books. I looked in the phone book and I found the number of this local treatment center. And I got in my car, leaving work, and I drove into the driveway of this place. And I thought, what am I doing here? I don't have this kind of problem. And I just reversed out. And I didn't have the courage to tell her that I never went. So I started making up these fictitious therapy sessions, which I did for about 3 months. And all these revelations I was having about myself.
You would have been great on the TIA talks. On the show, like creative mind coming up with all these ideas.
Yeah,
wonderful.
And then when she caught me using again, she said, "Look, I better come with you to the next session, because clearly this is not working." And I kept up the charade right up until we drove into the driveway of this place. And then when I got out the car, I said, "Listen, I've got something to tell you. I've actually never been here." Wow. And then we went in and I guess that was my first experience of actual like counseling and therapy. And it worked for about 6 months. But I was just kind of, we call it dry drugging. So I wasn't actually using, but the thoughts were still there. And my addiction kind of cost me my marriage initially, almost cost me my kids. Because, of course, when we got divorced, what court is going to allow an addict to spend time with the kids? Yeah. So, fast forward to 2001, what's happened in between is I've started a business. I've started an underwriting agency with a partner. And the wheels were really coming off, after I got divorced, I could just use whenever I wanted to. And it was really, I was in some really bad situations. What you see in the movies is often glamorized, but, I'd often find myself like in this huge house that I was renting, had like zero furniture in it, just a bed. I'm kind of like in one corner. And someone that I worked with, in this business said, you need to, she said, we're having a braai at my place this weekend. Do you want to come? And I was like, yeah, that sounds amazing. So I arrive at this braai, and it's out in Midrand, somewhere on a big plot. Lots of people there, big bonfire kind of burning and just chairs all around it. And I'm walking around this bonfire with a magnum of wine under my arm and a glass. I wouldn't have actually used the glass if I wasn't in public. So I'm pouring myself a drink, and I look through the flames, and I see this really beautiful woman sitting on the other side, and there's an empty seat next to her. I'm not a religious guy, but I thought, okay, someone is smiling down on me right now. Yeah. So I walk around to her, I say, hey, can I pour you a drink? She says, no, thanks, I don't drink. And I'm like, this is like the first adult that I've met, or anyone over the age of 13 that doesn't drink.
Yeah.
So I'm like, what do you mean you don't drink? Are you an alcoholic? And she says, actually, I'm a recovering addict, know. So I'm like, oh, what's that all about? So we sit down, 2 hours go by. I've just been chatting to her. And she gets up, she says, I've got to go. She gives me a business card. I put it in my wallet.
At least you got her number.
Yeah, exactly. That's what I was thinking. I was like, oh, wow, I'm in here,
Yeah.
And she left, and I went big that night. I did like way more drugs and alcohol than I had ever done before. I think I was actually trying to kill myself.
Yeah.
And I kind of, the next morning at about 11 a.m., I'm at this dodgy club out in somewhere down, at the time it was Bayers Nordia, with a bunch of people who are like 10 years younger than me, and they look like hell. So I'm thinking, I must really look like hell. And then I realized I was supposed to go and fetch my kids. It was my day with them, and I was in no condition. So I went home. I asked my dad to go and pick them up, and I got home, and I just kind of collapsed on the bed, and I was like, I cannot carry on like this, And I owned a gun, and I must say, I thought about ending it. And so I'm like lying face down on the bed, and on the floor is my wallet, and I'm like sort of staring at it, and there's a little corner of this business card sticking out. So I pick it up and I pull it out, and I look at this woman's name, and I'm like, I'm gonna call her, And I mean, I didn't have the courage to do it straight away, and I was still a bit wasted. So I waited till the next day, and then I rang her up and I said, hey, it's Simon here. I don't know if you remember me. And she went, oh, the guy with the wine. That's how she remembered me. And she said, do you want to go to a meeting? And I was like, how did you know? And of course what she was referring to was a Narcotics Anonymous meeting. And she said, yeah, there's one tomorrow in Norwood. Be there at like 7:30. And yeah, let's see how it goes. And I arrive at this meeting. It's like the next day. And there's about, I'm sure, 200 people in this room, which was only meant for about 100. People sitting on chairs in a circle on the floor. And there's this young woman, maybe 21, 22, and she's sharing her story that day. It's her birthday, as we call it. So it was her second anniversary of being clean. Anyway, I sit down on a chair. I've got, I'm not going to mention her name, but the lady that I met, she's sitting next to me. And suddenly this weird stuff starts happening. They go around in this big circle, people introducing themselves.
And you're like, what did I get into?
And it's like, hi, I'm so-and-so, I'm an addict. Yeah. And every now and again, someone goes, hey, I'm a visitor. And either those were her family or just people that hadn't decided yet. So I turn to the woman who brought me in and I say, what do I say? She says, well, are you an addict or a visitor? And I'm like, I don't know. And they're coming closer and closer to me. And then it gets to me and I say, hey, I'm Simon, I'm an addict. Now this is on the 5th, 6th of June. So I cleaned up on the 4th of June, so I had a day or so in between. That was the first time in my life that I'd actually said it and meant it. Wow. I'd said it before to get people off my back. And I was just so lucky because the penny just dropped, and I listened to this young woman's story, and she's a heroin addict, and we were completely different backgrounds and different drug of choice, and yet I could relate to everything, You know, I could see all the similarities and none of the differences. And then after the meeting, everyone's hugging, and, you know, also very weird, like hugging strangers. I love hugging people now, you know. Although it's sometimes inappropriate, but especially in Woolworths. So not everyone digs that sort of thing, you know. So I learned at that meeting that for me to stay clean, I needed to do 90 meetings in 90 days.
Wow.
And I ended up doing 240 in a row.
Wow.
Yeah, and learning about the 12 steps and getting a sponsor.
Yeah.
Simon,
Simon,
I've been clean ever since, you know, and it's...
Geez, from 2001.
Yeah.
Wow.
Not a drop of alcohol or drugs have passed through the system here.
Jeez.
You know?
That's why you're so lean.
Yeah. I do eat food.
Yeah. Okay. That's
allowed.
Simon, I wanted to ask, for those who struggle with the same thing, that are in our everyday businesses, and, you know, sometimes it's so difficult to just bring the topic up with anybody, or even just speak to somebody that you think you can trust without knowing that they would judge you or whatever the case is. What would you say for anyone that is listening that desperately wants to get out of the situation, or even doesn't even know that they should get out of the situation? What would you say to that person?
You know, I've met a lot of people that I believe have substance abuse problems, but they, as you said, that they might not know. They know, they're just in denial about it, you know. And I've seen people being committed to rehabs and treatment centers that really didn't want to be there. And actually, it's just a waste of time and money, because until the penny drops and you realize that you've hit rock bottom, there isn't really a lot that can be done about it. But what I'm 100% convinced of is that you have to surround yourself with people that think the same way about addiction. And that was what worked for me. You know, I started using because I was kind of a nerdy kid at school. And I started using because I wanted to be part of something, you know, and it looked like everyone was having so much fun that was drinking and doing whatever. And it was only when I started going to NA and, you know, being in 12-step meetings that I realized that it was so ironic, you know, that all I had to do to be part of something was to stop doing what I was doing, you know, and then surround myself with people that were on the same journey as me, so that it became almost abnormal to want to drink and do drugs. And so you have to kind of get yourself out of the situation, because you start creating environments that appear to be normal.
I was going to say environment is key, I guess.
Yeah. So, you know, if you hang around with a bunch of people that get drunk every day, then that's what's normal. You know, I remember sitting in a room somewhere with a bunch of guys, and we'd been doing E and MDMA and whatever. And we were like, how cool is it that we found each other, because we're all divorced, we've got problems at work. What a coincidence, you know, not going, oh, maybe it's because of this. So somebody that's struggling, I mean, I'm happy if somebody wants to reach out to me, you know, I can tell them where to go and how to get help. You don't have to go to treatment. I mean, treatment centers have their place. Yeah. I just went to an NA meeting, you know, it's free. And you just sit there and listen. And when you were talking earlier about, you know, learning to listen, you know, take the cotton wool out of your ears and put it in your mouth for a bit. Yeah. You know,
I did that on the show. And speaking of which, Simon, I think that's an incredible journey, to be honest. I think so many people go through this. And I mean, what you've highlighted to me was that it wasn't overnight. It was a long journey, and it's still ongoing. And I think it's incredible to see what you've achieved out of that and what you continue to do, even with the fruitful marriage and even a great business that you've come out of and then started, you know. And I think I saw when I mentioned SHA at the roadshow, you know, saw you at a roadshow, and that's where I kind of saw Simon Colman for the first time. I didn't even know what TIA was really, you know, or that you were a judge. I knew about the show, actually. I just didn't know about you. And I just found that was a point where I saw SHA come out of whatever they were at, and I saw an innovative company and something like special, and it wasn't just the roadshow and brand change and all of those things, but the company itself. We were introduced to you guys properly in that phase, and I just it comes down to your leadership, I'm sure. And
look,
just
I can't take credits. I mean, I was definitely a part of that movement, but we had really strong leadership in the business. I mean, I was one of the execs, but the CEO was really like, obsessed with us becoming something more. And I worked with people like Alicia, and so it was just so easy, because everyone was kind of moving in the same direction. We all wanted the same thing. We didn't really know what it was going to look like at the end, but that was what made it so exciting. We were just going to sort of forge ahead and see where we landed up. I'm doing that now in my own business.
Yeah, and I think all of that change comes about because the industry changes so often. Sure. I mean, I think we've got agile leaders in the insurance industry. I mean, our industry does change almost every 3 years, really, the climate of the insurance industry, in my opinion. I don't know, you guys are much smarter than me. But Mitesh, what would you say the biggest kind of trend in the insurance industry is at the moment, and where are we going? Because, I mean, we've come out of COVID, the pandemic, that obviously changed things. But where are we going now? What are you seeing in your role at Tracker? Because you guys see the risk side too. I mean, the high risk vehicles. I mean, how many times do you get an SMS to check your tracking device? I mean, it's from you guys. So Mitesh, maybe if you want to elaborate on the industry.
Sure. I think COVID's taught us a lot about situational stress and how to sort of manage that. I just want to come back to Simon's sort of last comment, if you don't mind. Simon, that was one of the most beautiful things that I've ever heard. And I literally say it's almost tearing up. And I'll tell you why. It's because I think that what we're lacking today in this world of social media is that people only post the positive things and the good things that happen to them. So I always have the saying, which is don't get catfished by your heroes, because people idolize people, and naturally so. People only post victories, successes, wins. No one posts that they applied for a job and didn't get it, or they tried to launch a product and it failed. And I think that I've always been a Simon Colman fan, but sort of more than that, I think what the call is that we need more humble, sincere, genuine, and authentic leaders that share transparently and openly, and that people would follow. Because I think the confusion often sometimes is that people in power believe that they have followers, but they don't. They only have, because of their power, they have followers. If they were to leave and people could choose, would they actually have followers? And I sort of often visualize that in sort of boardrooms, executives sort of sit and say, if I left today, who would follow me? And if I left today, who would I take with? And I think the more profound question is, if I left today, who would follow me? I just wanted to commend Simon on that and sort of maybe to share an anecdote to it. So when I worked at my previous employer, sort of all of us heads of departments would go speak at strategy sessions, and no one wanted to speak after I spoke. And it was sort of this real thing where, I don't know, maybe some things that I say are profound and insightful and deep. And that's sort of how I feel right now after listening to Simon speak. So yes, some days you're the bird and the other days you're the statue. I see how that feels. But coming back to your point, I think, are we learning fast enough though, Jason? Like that's sort of what I think. So right, we didn't know about riots and strikes were sort of low on the radar. Then came sort of riots and strikes, right? Corporate governance, maybe more to DNO, which is more Simon's speciality than mine, always sort of seemed fine and good. Like, right, if you're a director, you're a good person and ethical and you have integrity, etc. Then came flourish of corporate governance scandals in South Africa, probably some of the biggest in the world even, perhaps. The weather, we always speak about weather. I think before it was sort of these tremors from the mining activity in sort of Joburg, Northwest, Mpumalanga. And then now sort of with the floods, the fires, etc. So my sort of steer would be that when we have these lovely risk registers that we all love, and we give things a score from 1 to 5 on sort of severity and the sort of likelihood, and do we give enough attention to emerging risks? So I'd always bring it back to sort of education, and not in its formal sense, but sort of in being knowledgeable rather. It's, are we reading enough, engaging enough, understanding what's happening globally, and then how that can impact what would happen in South Africa. The same, so to speak. So sort of reading a few integrated reports, etc. The issues look like it's sort of collections of premiums. That's a big problem today. So people can't afford sort of to pay premiums. But we sort of knew this, watching sort of macroeconomic factors then sort of funnel into microeconomic factors. So I sort of question, without sort of answering what I think the new and emerging trends are, it's just that, are we geared in the right way to foresee it and be preemptive and then being the best solution when that sort of does emanate and sort of come to life?
Do you think that there needs to be a mind shift change in the industry with the way that we deal with certain things? Because I've seen we deal with things the same way, change rates, change excesses, change wordings. There's some, I think, like underlying issues that we could probably kind of change, just with the mindset change. What do you think on that?
So I think there's a few, right? And I think sort of firstly, what I always think about, what I see is sort of this over-reliance or over-emphasis on institutional knowledge and experience. And maybe to give sort of a quick example of it. So if we sort of had a head of sales today and we weren't doing well and he or she is asked to leave or sort of moves on and we're getting a new one in, the organization sort of believes this is a good opportunity for us, and what we want is something new, different, fresh, exciting, etc. And then we start crafting the job profile for this role. And it often goes back to, we want the person to have the same experience and the same education and having dealt with the same product lines as the incumbent that's just left. So it's maybe dovetailing that into diversity or sort of innovation through diversity. Diversity is no longer sort of gender diversity or racial or cultural diversity. Today, there's sort of age diversity, educational diversity, experience diversities. So good, yeah. And do we embrace that sort of enough in sort of our change?
Don't you think, though, that we've kind of, in South Africa, for obvious reasons, we have a lot of isms that we have to think about, in corporate. So, well, not just in corporate, but in South Africa generally. And we know that dealing with racism, for instance, has been at the top of the agenda and will continue to be, which means there hasn't always been as much focus on, gender issues or ageism. I was very pleased to hear you mention that. I actually spoke at an event a few weeks ago, and I only realized when I got there in the panel discussion that I was representing the old people, which was
Simon, I hate to break it to you, but that's exactly what you're doing today.
Yes, it keeps repeating. So I think we kind of, I'm not saying we took our eye off the ball, so to speak, but when you've got a lot of problems to deal with, you deal with the bigger ones first, and if it's such a big problem that it requires it needs to be continued to be dealt with, we tend to kind of ignore or push back the other issues that we might be facing in the workforce in particular.
So I think that's a really profound and insightful comment, because there's also no one talks about nepotism or favoritism or sort of the other ones, right? So you want to protect yourself from sort of the spotlight or headline sort of ones that
you
are going to
you don't want to be trending on social media kind of thing.
Sure, and now again back to sort of social media with sort of gender fluidity, if that's sort of the right word, and also sort of racism and its sort of ever-rifeness in South Africa. I think that what happens is then again coming back to sort of that risk view, right on top of it you have sort of these gender issues and racism, sort of the favorite, and it goes back to governance, right? So like I think everyone could benefit from a more robust governance structure that's sort of holistic and looks at everything more in sort of a deeper light and gives everything the attention. Because what happens is if the spotlight's on sort of the first two as an example, the other two sort of manifests and start sort of growing and developing. Maybe to come back sort of to the question, I think that the one thing we don't sort of value with innovation is sort of the speed and agility that it actually needs to be sort of executed at. And I'll give you an example. So I was sort of solutionizing an insurance product with a bank a year or two ago. And the bank sort of came and said, we're really innovative and stuff. And this is the solution that we want, but we can't get to that solution today. So what we've done is we've created a walking version of this product, and then a running version, and then a flying version of it. And in year one, we'll deliver the walking version. In year two, we'll deliver the running version. And in year three, the flying one. And I always thought that, but by year three, your flying version is actually then the walking version of the market.
Yeah.
So it's one thing to say we're innovative. I'm not a product manager, right? But like, it's one thing to say we're innovative. Here's our product roadmap and how we sort of deploy products. But sometimes the quickest way to go from 0 to 3 is to go straight to the number 3. You don't have to go from step 0 to 1 to 2 to 3, because you'd sort of fall behind. And I think we still have the tendency of being followers.
I think there's also that kind of fear, Mitesh, that, or rather there's the sentiment, especially in corporate, that I want to release something in its purest, most complete form. And we know from experience that, like with Microsoft Windows, the latest version is always full of bugs, because the best people that are going to find those for you are going to be the users. And I think corporates often worrying about reputation, obviously. They don't want to release anything unless it's 100% in the insurance industry. And I mean, this is something I'm really enjoying about being in the entrepreneurial space. I don't have access to the big budget, but I do have the ability to turn something around much quicker. We can launch something, test it. If it fails, pull it back in, fix it up, put it back out into the market again, and just kind of keep going through that cycle and developing something. But I can understand the fear on the part of, the big recognized brands that you just can't afford to put anything out there that doesn't work properly. I mean, car manufacturers do not do this. Or they would have us believe. Yeah.
They shouldn't.
We'll work the bugs out after the first few people have
the battery exploded.
Yeah. Let's not bring the cougar into this.
Beep. We don't beep out swear words, but we'll beep out that one.
No, that's well publicized.
No.
But if I can just add to what Mitesh was talking about, like, what are we not doing? And not in the innovation space, but for sustainability of the industry. There is a shift in focus towards risk management. And I mean, now if you want certain kinds of cover, you've got to go through, a hell of a process to kind of get your property insured. I don't even know if you can insure a thatched building anymore.
Don't even speak to me about that.
Right. But I think that what we haven't been focusing enough on, and you touched on the corporate governance issue, this kind of, I call it human capital risk. So this is the people risk in the business. I see this a lot because I'm a liability underwriter. So I know that, when you don't have a motivated workforce, they're not flying in formation, mistakes start happening, people get injured either at work or the products start injuring people. And if you really zoom out at some of the big sort of engineering failures that we've had, you can often find that at some point, somebody was involved in the process who didn't have their eye on the ball or who didn't have the skills to complete the task. And why is that the case? Well, we know that we've, in the engineering space, certainly we've lost a lot of people to Dubai and places like that where there's a lot of infrastructure development happening. But there's not enough focus on that human capital risk, the skills development, and then the corporate governance stuff, where if your leader's got a sort of, that corporate greed is at the top of the list, I think it just kind of filters through to everything else.
Yeah, I think that's good. Simon, I think a lot of our guests actually speak about the skills gap and what is happening to our skills in the industry and just in South Africa in general. I mean, we're seeing it. I think in closing, I just want to thank you both for joining me today. It's been an incredible chat, and the personal stories, and we've never got so deep, I don't think, on this on the podcast. So Simon, I really do appreciate that, and I think it will definitely inspire somebody. I want to close in just asking the question that I ask all the guests. And if you can try and keep it succinct, because I want people to remember it, and I want people to really reach out if they can actually partner up with anybody. But my question to you both is, if there was something that you would want to change in this industry, and I call it a burden that's on your heart or on your shoulders, of a responsibility that you think that you have as an individual, to bring about some sort of change or impact in this industry, where would you focus your time and energy, and how would you want others to get involved with you, or even just to do it on their own and see where it goes? Mitesh, would you like to start?
Sure. So I think I'll rather leave everyone with a tool to sort of sort it out, and sort of quickly just give. So something that I read recently was a blind person that sort of never had sight, sort of one day gets an eye transplant and gets vision, right, or the gift of sight. And the first thing that they do is they throw away the walking stick, right? So the same walking stick that served them to get them to this point, they don't need it anymore. Why? Because the perspective is different, the vision's sort of different, sort of, no pun intended. And the person can then sort of sit and say, okay, my goal now is to run. I had never had a vision or goal to run because I could barely walk being unsighted. And today, so how would that person learn how to run? Would they learn how to run using the walking stick? And the answer is probably no, right? And why is that? Because the very thing that brought you to where you are today is now the thing that's impeding, is the same thing that's impeding your ambition to sort of move to the next step. So I sort of implore anyone to sort of introspect and reflect in their own roles in organizations to understand what are these walking sticks that we are still carrying around with us. And legacy could be many things, right? It could be people, products, processes, systems that we still sort of anchor ourselves into believing we need to build innovation around. Whereas perhaps the more sort of helpful question is, how do we sort of leave this behind? And yeah, so I'd sort of leave the viewers with the question, sort of, where are sort of the walking sticks in your life that you're still harboring around, and maybe you need to sort of trade them in for a pair of jogging shoes and learn how to run.
So good. Simon?
Yeah, for me, I think it's about being proud of what we do in the industry. You know, embracing that we're actually fulfilling a noble purpose. You know, we help people get back on their feet. We repair their buildings, cars, their bodies. You know, this is what we do. We allow people to, especially in the direct insurance market, to focus on price. And that's what people think insurance is about, you know, the cheapest thing. But it's not. You know, what we do is extremely noble. We keep the wheels of the economy turning. When you're standing at a braai and someone says, oh, this damn insurance company, you know, step up. You work in the industry. Explain what it is that we do. If we don't believe it, no one else is going to believe it. You know, it's really up to us.
Yeah, sure. Simon, Mitesh, thank you so much for your time. And I'm definitely going to use some time to reflect on this conversation, because it was honestly incredible. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
Awesome. Thanks, Jason.
Jason.